And welcome back. So before we start to put the water pump and everything else back on the front of this engine, especially the radiator, and since it's pretty convenient actually with the radiator missing in the front of most of the accessories missing, allows us to just to kind of stand here because there's a sway bar. And with being able to stand here and have that brake booster missing, you can see we got very nice easy access to our spark plug wells. So we're going to go ahead and take advantage of the opportunity and go ahead and put our spark plugs in at this point. And we're going to be going back with OEM NGKs. And you can see the part number there. And we will be upgrading this to iridium. What came out of this motor originally were copper NGK plugs, which they're all over the forums about wanting to use copper with this engine, and it only liking copper. And the weird thing with that, and that may be the case back in the day, but just like we found out on our 6.4 when we did it. Now the 6.4, the 2500, the 2016 2500, model year 2016 that is, it came with iridium spark plugs, NGK spark plugs. And if you're on Rock Auto and you happen to be looking at spark plugs for 2009 Ram 1500, and if you look at the copper ones, there's actually a note that apparently it says OEM note where they're recommending iridium as an upgrade over the copper. So that's why we're going to go with iridium plugs. Not to mention the extended wear life on these, and I like these. I've used them for years. We're just going to be using our favorite 5/8 spark plug socket with the built-in swivel. Again, it helps for getting back here close to this firewall, but obviously with this brake booster missing, it makes getting to this driver's side immensely easier. And I did take the rubber boot out of this because it had a habit of sticking to brand new plugs and not coming off, and you'd go to pull this out and the extension would come out with it and leave this down in the spark plug well, which unfortunately, if you know on these Hemis, is that once you get something down inside that spark plug well, it's pretty deep down in there and hard to get out. So what we'll be using if we need to is our paper towel trick. We can take a little piece of shop towel, put it into our socket, put our spark plug in there so it'll hold it in place enough where we can lower it down the spark plug well, tighten it, pull it back out, and just retrieve our paper towel. Another thing that we can do, and I've done this before, is if you take one of these spark plugs and just kind of gingerly lower it into the hole, with your finger, it'll line up to where it needs to go, and then you can just follow it up with the spark plug socket and tighten it up. Now we're not going to be using anti-seize on these plugs, even though when we took them out, the plugs that were in here had anti-seize on them. If you actually look at NGK's website, they'll actually tell you that they don't suggest that you use anti-seize, because anti-seize can give you the ability to actually over torque these plugs. And there is a torque value on these, and if you want, you can look it up on their website by that part number. But I'm going to do what I normally do, which if you see there, it says about 1/2 to 2/3 of a turn after it makes contact. And when you're putting these in, they do have a crush washer on them. And we'll get one out the box to show it to you. And be careful with these. I'm sorry the camera angle. When you take them out of the box, they just got that little cardboard protective ring on it to protect that very expensive tip, which is why I'm not going to gap these. I'm going to go with the gap that comes with them out of the box because of that tip. You don't want to break that iridium point off. There we go. And that crush washer I was talking about is right there. So as you tighten these down and they get a little bit snug, all of a sudden they're going to feel like they stripped even though they didn't. It's kind of a weird feeling where that crush washer will start to crush and then it will immediately just kind of tighten back up again. And that lets you know that crush washer has flattened out, done its job, and helped provide a seal. So we're going to work on that one. I'm going to get a couple of these into the bore, and I'll bring you back and show you what I mean. Talk to you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. To kind of show you what I'm doing here is that just taking a little piece of blue shop towel, as you can see, just some kind of half of it, just hanging it over the edge and then pushing it down in place. And that does a really good job of holding on to the socket without that rubber boot in there, and it gives you the ability to kind of lower this down, spark plug well, tighten it up, and pull your socket out. And then you can just kind of fish that blue shop towel out as well after the fact. Or like I said, you can kind of take one of these plugs and just kind of gingerly just manually lower it down on the cylinder, and then meet up with the, because what you don't want to do is you just don't want to drop this into the cylinder and by chance bend or damage that tip. It's just what you're looking at doing. So we're going to work on getting these in on this side, and then we'll bring you back. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention is that yes, we do have 16 of these plugs, and you may be asking yourself, why 16? Well, you know, what can I say? Hemi, they use 2 spark plugs per cylinder, so if you're going to be doing this job, just keep that in mind. You're going to need 16 of these bad boys. But with that being said, we're going to get these spark plugs installed, and we'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see we've got all 16 of our spark plugs in. We've got them tightened to manufacturer specification of the plugs. We're just going through now and taking our coils and putting a little shot of dielectric grease down inside each of the connection points and then getting them installed. Because once again, as you can see, without everything in here and most of the front of the engine still missing, getting back here to put these coils in has never been easier. So we're going to go ahead and continue to get these installed, and we'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. You can see we got our coil packs reinstalled. We got our electrical connections remade. This side, we see we got our wiring harness all staked back down to our valve cover where it belongs. This side, this hold off was still okay, but the other 2 were broken, and they're not an exact match. You can see them there, but they do a pretty good job of pressing into the valve cover and being able to at least give us a place that we can anchor the wiring harness so it doesn't flap around. But while we're here, since we've got easy access to this, we're going to go ahead and install the fuel rail. We're going to take a little bit of silicone paste and lube up these rubber O-rings, and then we're going to go ahead and get this fuel rail reinstalled in and go ahead and hook our gas line up. Again, just trying to take care of as much as we can while we have the glorious ability to stand in the front of this truck and get easy access to these items. So we're going to work on this next, and then we'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see we got our fuel rail installed and our electrical connections made to all 8 of our fuel injectors. Remember, when you're tightening these bolts, which these are 10 millimeters, you got 2 10 millimeters on this side, 1 10 millimeter here, and this one's a 13 millimeter, because remember, this also serves as a mounting point for the beautification or engine cover. Just remember, you're threading, these thread in the plastic of the intake, so you know, no need to get a torque gun, or I'm sorry, impact gun or torque wrench or anything. Just run them down till they're hand tight and snug, and you're good to go. So like I said, you see we got all our connections done. It's seated in place. I'm going to make the fuel line connection. I guess we can go ahead and do that now. Do a little bit of live action. There you go. You heard that click. We know that's in. Then we're going to take our safety clip, thread that in like so, and then clip that in place. Safety fuel lines on, safety clips in, fuel rails in. All of the electrical connections that need to happen are almost complete for the intake. Remember, we still have a throttle body that we need to clean up, put in, and its electrical connection will be these. So that needs to come up here. This connection here that you see is for the cam position sensor that we need to reinstall. And don't worry on these pieces right here that are broken. That's what these clips are also for. So it'll work perfect in situations like this where that'll press into that non-used mounting hole and then help us zip tie and re-secure our wiring harness where it belongs. Also for those two right there, since those are a little bit worse for wear, we'll go ahead and get those replaced again, just to make sure that we hold everything where it needs to be held. So that's where it's set. So you can see that we got our spark plugs installed, coil packs, electrical connections are done, fuel rail, fuel injectors, electrical connections for those are done. So we're looking good. We're inching our way closer. The next thing we'll do is get our throttle body cleaned up and get that mounted again, since we're here and we've got easy access to the front of it. Then we'll get our cam position sensor installed. But we'll bring you back for that. Other than that, I'll catch you in a bit. Thank you much. Bye. And welcome back. First I need to apologize. You're going to see some stuff that we obviously installed on the front of the motor, but I did not capture it on video. That's because I had a work crew here servicing the air conditioner in the garage, and I didn't want to inadvertently get one of them on video in case they didn't want to be on video, if you understand what I mean. Again, just trying to respect the privacy of others. But what you can see that we've done here is that we've got our water pump installed. We cleaned up our throttle body, as you can see, got all the carbon and gunk out of it. Remember, we replaced our throttle body gasket earlier, so we got our throttle body repositioned. We got our mounting bracket, which bolts to this one of the studs on the water pump right above the thermostat, bolts to the collar on the intake, and then holds our air conditioning lines, as you can see here. I've got one more clip I need to re-clip on the air conditioning lines on this end. I'll take care of that one shortly. You can see that we also got our crank pulley installed. Unfortunately, again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to film it, but it's the same process we did on the 6.4, in which I do have a harmonic balancer install tool, which I'll show you here shortly. I use that to get the pulley started, and I'll take the tool off. That way I can use the actual crank bolt. As long as the crank bolt will thread in, you know, at least 6, 7, 8 turns, get a nice good bite on the threads, you can use the crank bolt to actually drive it on. So I put the old crank bolt on, give it a little bit, put a little bit of oil on the threads to help ease it, and just use the old crank bolt with a 12 volt half-inch impact. I'm sorry, not a 12 volt, but a half-inch electric impact. Drive it on. And in case you're wondering how far do you need to drive that until it gets done, you'll tell when it stops, and it may even start to spin the engine over, especially if it's you'll hear the torque wrench change where it no longer drives the pulley in, and you'll actually hear the torque wrench start to impact. You want to stop at that point. Also, if you're tightening this on and you start to see it spin the engine over, you've gone far enough. You can stop at that point. Let's see, on this water pump, this is the Gates water pump, if you remember from our parts review. It did not come with a new sensor up there. I believe that is for coolant temperature. Unlike the OEM water pump that we ordered for the 6.4, it came with new sensors and not have to do it separately. So we actually just reused this and put a little thread sealant on it off of the old water pump. I mean, as far as I know, the temperature sensor's working fine. If it proves itself not to work, then we'll change it out. There's 2 clips, if you remember from the previous video clip segment, that we were going to replace, and we did that. We replaced 2 of these on this section of wiring harness here, and it's a wiring harness that contains the electrical connection for the temperature sensor. Snips onto the bracket there, snips onto the bracket here, comes around and also produces the electrical connector for the throttle body, and this connector that's left over at the top is for the inlet air temperature sensor that's inside the intake tubing. So we got that Jakai just hanging out waiting for its time to install. And we went ahead and installed our new thermostat and our new thermostat housing that you can see here on the side. And I'll show you the part numbers for those again. That is for the coolant outlet, which is the thermostat housing, again, Gates. This was for the thermostat. And of course, you may have saw this in the previous parts video, but the water pump itself is also Gates And there's the part number for that one. The other thing that was odd about the Gates pump, it was just the way they did it, was that on the factory pump, you can see this seal in the factory pump was also just smashed completely flat and even with the water pump. On the factory pump, when you order them, these seals are typically already installed. Again, like I said, on a factory pump you also get new sensors, or at least on the 6.4 we did. On the Gates pump, the seal came separate in a bag, but it did hold itself in the grooves well enough to be able to get it on the truck without the seal falling out. So just, you know, keep that in mind, that the seal, at least on this one it did, it came in a separate bag and had to be installed. These were two of the bolts, if you remember from the first parts video, that were inside the water pump, that we went ahead and just replaced these with newer fasteners. I don't think I think that was the bag for the fasteners right there. Yeah, that was for these longer bolts with the small threaded area and the big shank. If you remember our parts video, we went over where those are actually contained in at, and where they're contained in is the right below the water pump, the lower outlet, and right above the lower outlet is where those two longer bolts thread into. Now, I need to make a correction on a statement I made on one of the previous segments. I thought, if you remember, that this upper timing cover bolt was missing. It actually wasn't. And if you remember, the hole looked really, really rusty, like it had actually been missing a bolt. And if you remember from the previous video clip even, we made a special shortened bolt because the threads were kind of damaged further, or what they felt like they were being damaged further in the block. And we weren't able to get a full-size bolt to seat. Well, let me correct something. This top bolt on the timing cover that I thought was one of the timing cover bolts actually isn't. It's only the lower one on the left hand side that's considered the timing cover bolt. The upper one actually threads through the water pump. So it's the lower bolt for the lower radiator hose, goes through the water pump into the hole in that top corner, through the timing cover, and then into the block. So it goes through the water pump, through the timing cover, and into the block. So I want to make that correction. That bolt actually wasn't missing. We actually took it out when we took the water pump out, but it was the one of the two. It's that one right there, the really crusty, dirty looking one that we took out, that if you remember, I made a comment I wanted to get new bolts and replace it. That's why that mounting hole inside the block looked as crusty as it did, because you see the bolt that came out of that. So that tells me there must have been potentially a small coolant leak or something inside that area, or somehow water just got behind this and just kind of settled, you know, inside the channel, because it would have gone right here. Here's the old pump. That's where that bolt would have gone through here, through the timing cover and into the block. The only thing, and you can see how rusty that old factory hole is along with the top one. This one isn't too bad, but it's got a little bit rust in it as well. Somehow it looks like water had gotten in here, or moisture had gotten in here, and just, you know, kind of worked on corroding that bolt out. So with that being said, again, that lower bolt wasn't actually missing. It's one of the ones that goes through the water pump. Let's see, I think that is everything that we've done to the truck today. So we've got a lot of pieces on here. We've got a lot more to go. We want to get the alternator on next, and then the power steering pump on next. Alternator, power steering pump, and then idler. And then once those are in place, we'll be able to put our drive belt on, and then work towards getting our radiator installed. Once we have the radiator installed, we'll draw a vacuum on the system, verify it can hold the vacuum for 15-20 minutes, and if it can, then we'll vacuum fill coolant into the system to make sure that we get all the air out, much like we did with the 6.4 when we did its coolant fill. But with that being said, again, I want to apologize. I wasn't able to film this because, again, we had a work crew here working on the air conditioning for the garage, but hopefully I was able to kind of summarize exactly what we've done here. And this is our old diagram when we took the water pump out. It was, paramount to be able to make sure that we get the right bolts back in the water pump in the right locations. I will mention it in the follow-up clip what the torque is for these water pump bolts, or at least what the manual says. Now, interesting enough though, yes, and there is a protective sleeve there so you don't damage the threads when you go the fan on, so I'm just going to leave that in place till we're ready to put the fan back on. I will tell you what the foot-pounds were in the next clip, but however, for whatever reason, all data didn't show what the torque sequence was on this, so I just kind of did an old school star pattern. I started over here, what I call bolt number 1, shot down over here to this corner, shot down over here to this corner, and then finally up here to this corner, and just kind of kept going in a zigzag pattern until we had everything, nice and secure to make sure that seal, seated against that time cover evenly. But with that being said, I will let you go and I'll bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye. And welcome back. So in preparation for installing this, reinstalling the alternator onto our motor, we're going to do the same trick that we did with the 6.4 alternator install. Going to do a little bit different of a variation on that. And what you see set up here is a 6-inch C-clamp, and I believe this is a 26mm socket, because there's actually, let me just take this apart and I'll show it to you. So there's a little, and the way these work when you install them is when you tighten this bolt up, it takes this sleeve right here and pulls it inward on both of them, and in a sense what that does is it pinches it onto the alternator bracket, aka the timing cover. So if you ever notice, when you take these bolts out, the alternator is still fairly secure, and you kind of have to get a pry bar in there and maybe rock it a little bit to get it free. Well, that's going to fight you a little bit on the install. So what we want to try to do is to take this sleeve and push it back out this way, and that will allow the alternator just to cleanly fall into place. And then when you tighten this bolt up again, it'll take this sleeve and pull it back this direction, pinching it back in. So we've got a 26mm shallow well that we're going to put on this end. And then what I've done is I've threaded the bolt in, mounting bolt in, but not all the way, and left it out about that far as you can see, because what I want to do is just use this bolt to push this sleeve that way. And it shouldn't hurt the bolt to do this, but I just want to do a slight variation on the kind of the method we showed for the 6.4, because it's a little bit straighter. So let me get this C-clamp set back up and I'll bring you back. And just to confirm, yes, that is a 26mm shallow well, and a 26mm because it's I need to fit it around the tab that you see there, just so it's got something to push against. Let me get this set up and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. I got you in a mini tripod. You can see our setup here. We've got our socket, so it's got some room back here to push that sleeve in a little bit. You can see, we've got our other part of our C-clamp on the kind of the flat part of our bolt. And I'm not going to go too terribly tight with this because it shouldn't take much to push that sleeve back. Again, you don't want to put like an impact type C-clamp on this, because you don't want to bend this bolt in doing this. We're going to tighten this up a little bit, and we should. You actually can see that. Hopefully you can see that sleeve move. I'll rotate the alternator and zoom you in, but I can see that sleeve starting to push back already. There we go. Hopefully you saw that, and that's now flush with this bracket. So now we can just back this out. Back our bolt out. And hopefully you can see that we've now got a bigger gap in there and that this is now flush. But let me pause you and flip the alternator around. We're going to get set up to do the same thing on this side, but I'll zoom you into this and hopefully you can see that a bit better. One moment. And welcome back. I got you zoomed in about as far as I can. Now this one's not out too far, but you should see that start to push in. Let me get my C-clamp a little bit more centered here. There we go. And here we go. There we go. Yep. Hopefully you just saw that push in. Didn't take much. That one wasn't out too far. But you can see now that that is pushed out more. That is now flush. We can take our bolt out. And our bolt, as you can see, is none the worse for the wear. Again, it's not really much pressure that you're applying on that when you want to do that. It doesn't take much to push that out, but again, just use a nice hand-based, you know, C-clamp. Don't use one of the big ones that have the socket type end on it that are meant for impacts, for like removing ball joints, things of that nature, because that's going to give you too much force, and you can run the risk of you know, bending that mounting bolt. But there you go. Hopefully that was helpful. And then what we'll do next is that when we bring you back, we'll work on getting this alternator installed, and I'll show it to you. But now with those spacers pushed out, it should fall into position. With that being said, I'll let you go and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So just want to show this to you. We're in the process of installing our alternator. If you remember in the last segment, we showed how to push those spacers back. So what I want to show you here is the result of that. You see how easy it is to lift that alternator out of position, and how easy it is just to drop it back in. So again, just want to kind of show you, it makes that process a lot smoother. So what we're going to do, we're going to get the bolts into that one, get them tightened up. And then the next thing we'll do is we'll swing our power steering pump in place, and we'll get that one taken care of. So I'll bring you back in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. Sorry, it's pretty sunny out here, so you're probably going to get a little swamping on the camera, because a lot of it comes in through that passenger side wheel well. Because I did get the cover, by the way. We did order a new one. We just haven't put it in yet. A lot of that sun bounces off that concrete and catches the corner of the camera. I apologize. You can see we got our alternator reinstalled, along with our control wiring, and of course our main battery positive. One thing to note on these main positives is don't over torque them. You know, get them down and nice and hand tight, and then stop at that point, because you don't want to over torque these and potentially break the internal electrical connection on them. Otherwise you'll be, you know, buying a new alternator. And let's get this cap on. There we go. Perfect. So we're in the process of just reinstalling our power steering pump. As you can see, it's just 3 bolts, top, bottom, and left hand side. Just rotate the power steering pump pulley until one of the holes lines up with the bolt that you're working on, and you can go ahead and tighten it up. And as you saw in the video, in case you missed the first video that we have in the series, there's enough length in the hose here that you can kind of just push it over here in the corner, just to kind of get it off to the side and have a little storage cubby for it. And kind of, it's nice because it gets it out of the way of everything. So we're going to work on getting that tightened up, and then we'll bring it back when we put our tensioner on. And then once our tensioner's on, that'll be all of our accessories at that point, and we'll be able to put our belt on and then carry on from there. But I'll bring you back in a bit. Bye. Okay, welcome back. You can see that we've got our power steering pump pulley reinstalled at this point. Don't worry, I'll get some cleaner on here and, you know, clean this down so at least it, you know, will match a little bit more with the other work that's been done. See all this nice shiny new metal, and you look over here and see this pulley. Even though I know it'll just get dirty again, but at least I'll know it was, you know, at least a little bit cleaner when it was put back together. So this is our idler pulley. You'll notice there's a pin on the back of the idler pulley, and will match up with that divot right there, which is in the water pump. So we're going to get this lined up, we're going to get this bolted in, and then we'll bring it back. Thank you much. And welcome back. You can see that we've got our idler pulley installed. I should say our tensioner installed. One thing I forgot to mention on yesterday's video, but for full disclosure, we went ahead and installed our heat shields both on driver and passenger side. They're relatively easy to get to. And the dipstick tube, as you can see there, has been re-secured. It goes to the upper leftmost bolt. Hopefully I can get you in there to see that. So upper leftmost bolt of the exhaust. So what I did was on this side, I put the heat shield on and put the dipstick tube on it, and then just use the fastener for the heat shield on top of the dipstick tube. So that's got that secured. And then you can see on the passenger side here, we've got our heat shield reattached on this side as well. So as you can see on the front of our motor, it means we've got all of our accessories back in place at this point. I think what we're going to do next, since we don't have the battery box in here and we got some of these lines still pulled off to the side, is that we're going to go ahead and sneak that brake booster in there and at least get it bolted to the firewall and hooked up to our brake lines. We're still going to have to bleed the brake system, but at least we can get it kind of installed and out of the way. And then we'll come back and do our belt routing. And then once that's in, really the only thing that leaves at this point is that we need to put the radiator in. We want to flush the heater core, get that taken care of, get the radiator in, vacuum test, and then fill via a vacuum the coolant system. And once we have that done, it's just a matter of slapping some oil and a new oil filter in it and giving it a test run. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go grab the brake booster, and we'll start working on getting that reinstalled, and I'll bring you back. I probably won't film that one because all the bolts for it, obviously, as you would guess, are on the inside of the cab, up underneath all the brake pedals and such. So it's a bit of a pain and a bear to get to, but it can be done because we've taken it out twice now and reinstalled it. The biggest pain is just fighting the module in and through here and getting everything lined up and kind of get it pushed back into place. So I want to work on that, and when we get that rebolted, I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So I wanted to give you a little shot of this to show you what I was talking about. You can see some of the bolts from this shop, but you got 4 of them that hold that booster in, and they're all behind the brake and the accelerator. And if you have an adjustable one like this truck is, where you can adjust how high the brake and the gas pedal set, you're going to want to crank it all the way forward as high as it'll go before you disconnect your battery to give you as much room. But you can see what you're dealing with, so you'll need a combination of various swivels and links of ratchet, just as we have here. And you got enough space in there to get about 3/8 ratchet hardware in there. You're not going to get anything like a 1/2 inch in there. It's just going to be too tight of a fit, especially for the upper one there and the lower one, where you kind of have to almost go through between the brake and the gas pedal to get to it. But with that being said, we're going to work on getting these tightened up, and then we'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So once you've got your fasteners torqued back down for your brake booster, remember, do not forget to reinstall this retaining clip. This retaining clip locks the arm off the brake booster into the brake pedal. Having this clip missing could be very, very, very bad, because it will allow that rod to potentially move off of the mount point in that brake pedal, and that would mean you would have no more brakes. So just remember that when you're done, reclip your safety clip, and you can kind of see the way that just would slide on this direction and the center would come over this tab right here, and this little end of this tab kind of locks into the groove into the circle part right there in the center that you're going to push it over. So that pivot point right there, you can see it's got a groove on it, and that's what this clip is going to push over on top of, and this little tang right there you see in the center is going to lock into that groove. Again, just remember that you make sure to put that back on. Once we get this done, we'll bring you back for the next piece. Thank you much. Bye. Oh, and in case you're curious, being underneath the dashboard and 96-degree heat, argumentatively, I guess, can make this job go a bit easier because it motivates you to get it done and get out of the heat. That being said, I'll talk to you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our brake lines reattached to our booster at this point. And in case you're curious, yes, I did use a set of line wrenches to tighten that. And if the 12 on this means 12 millimeter, which I believe it was, that was the size we used. I just used this set from OEM Tools, which has a nice little swivel on it so you can get in hard to reach places. Works pretty well. But those are tightened in, and what we're going to do next is, once I find where it went, there's our electrical connection for low brake fluid indicator. There you go, heard that click, push the locking tab back in place, and then obviously we still need to fill the reservoir and do a complete brake bleed on all 4 cylinders, but we'll take care of that in due course. So I think the next thing that we're going to focus on getting in here and getting done, I want to go ahead and get the, telling you, sunlight heats that metal up, just almost burnt my arms. Resting right here on the top of the radiator, so top of the frame support. I think what we're going to do next is go ahead and get the dry belt on, since it's right here in our face and easy to get to. And like I said, I'll see if I can clean some of that up a little bit. So go ahead and take care of that, and once we get that on, then we'll work on getting the radiator in here next. Yeah, I think that'll be the next piece. Then once the radiator's in, we can concentrate on putting the fan shroud and all that other goodness in. But we'll bring you back for the next piece. Thank you much. Bye. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our accessory belt on, and yes, we did clean up our power steering pulley and reservoir, as you can see there. This is the model number of Gates belt that we went with. You'll notice it is the green heavy-duty belt. Not that you have to spend the extra money on a heavy-duty belt. I did in this case because I like green. I like Gates's heavy-duty belts and their supercharger belts. And again, we want this guy to have a nice long life where it's going. We also want to make sure it's as trouble-free as possible. So spend a few extra dollars on a heavy-duty belt, if it gives us some extra longevity, you know, that's good. And you can kind of see the way the belt routes there, at least on this particular Hemi, the way it routes. And in case you're curious, there's a belt routing diagram for you there. So you got your alternator at the top, your alternator around your idler, over your power steering, down through, loop around your air conditioner, comes over, goes around your bottom crank, and then kind of loops around the back half of the belt around your tensioner, comes over and makes contact with your water pump. And I think what we're going to concentrate on next is getting the replacement radiator in here. And then, of course, you've seen it before. Let's see here. CFS radiator. It is going to be an aftermarket. Model number 3662. So we're going to start taking some accessories and hardware off our old radiators, such as the rubber mounts that we're going to need. Comparing the hardware bag they gave us with this radiator versus the OEM hardware, because if you remember when we did this on the 6.4, we actually reused some of the OEM hardware because it was a bit beefier than what came with the radiator. So we're going to compare all that and see which hardware we choose to go with, and then we'll bring you back. Talk to you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. So you can see we got a radiator installed, and I have to say I'm impressed with CSF on this radiator. Even though it's an aftermarket one, it did a really nice job of lining up. They didn't give you any bolts, but all of the threaded inserts you need were already pre-installed in the radiator, and they were all matched up to use the factory bolts that came out of it. So unlike the one I ordered for the 2500, unlike that radiator, it came with replacement bolts in some cases, and the nut inserts that came with it didn't match the factory hardware, which is why we ended up taking the little inserts out of the original OEM radiator and using it in the aftermarket. But in this case, they did a really nice job. All of their inserts were threaded to match the factory hardware. We didn't have to replace any of the inserts. We didn't have to use any non-OEM matching hardware. It used all the factory stuff to bolt back up. So very nice setup, actually. And so what we ended up transferring over were the upper rubber radiator mounts and the lower corner radiator mounts, like this one here. And you can kind of see how this fits, just the opposite of the de-install. The condenser slash transmission cooler assembly here just slides into some tabs at the end of the radiator. So what I found it easier to do was drop the radiator in, kick this end out so you can slide these tabs in, and then kind of pull it all together as one assembly, and then get the lower radiator to sit in its mounts. And then you can come through and get this side bolt on that holds your transmission lines, and then you got one bolt that comes in here for the front that holds your air conditioning lines, and you have these two bolts here, just like when we de-installed it, one here and one here, that hold this condenser slash transmission cooler assembly in place. So with that being said, that is installed, and what we're going to the only thing it didn't come with was a new radiator cap, so I was kind of surprised about that. We'll just have to take the one off the original, I guess. What we're gonna do next is just work on getting the upper and lower radiator hoses on. Now these are both Gates hoses as well. That is the upper one. You got to pay attention when you order these Gates hoses as well, is that depending on what digits you have in certain spots of your VIN dictates the hoses you need, so be mindful of that. That's the upper end that we need in this case, and this is the lower that we need in this case. And I did match them up already with the factory hoses, and you can see there that one's a nice match, as well as this one here, which is also a very nice match. Now the only thing I don't like about not using OEM hoses is when you order OEM hoses, and I'll show you this with the heater core, because with the heater core hoses we were able to get OEM hoses would come with all new fasteners. So you would get new spring clips in this hose's case. Since this plugs into the upper radiator shroud, you'd get a new one of these. So basically the hose may be a little bit more expensive, but you're getting new clamps, you're getting any new hold downs the hose would need would all come pre-installed on, versus having to take it off of these. Now what I'm going to do in this case, since we're not quite ready for the upper radiator hose to go in, we're just going to install the lower one, and then we'll wait till we have the fan shroud and the fan and all that back in place, and then we'll put our upper hose in. But what we're going to work on now is getting these clamps off, getting it transferred over to this hose, and just like we did with some of our previous videos, to help ease these hoses into place, I'm going to take just a hair amount and just a light amount of silicone paste, because rubber parts love silicone. You're not going to hurt it. Little bit of silicone paste just on the inside diameter of these hoses, and it should help them slide onto their fittings like butter. And then of course we're just going to reuse our factory spring clamps. So with that being said, we're going to get on to that and we'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see that we went ahead and installed our electric fan, and we're putting in the first part of our shroud. And so far I found the easiest thing to do is to remove the lower part of the shroud here. Go ahead and just set it in place, and then just raise this clutch fan up from the bottom and get it started threading. Now remember, it's a reverse thread, so you got to kind of spin it like you want to take it off to get it to tighten. And I don't know if you can see it there, but we did liberally coat the threads down with a bunch of anti-seize. Again, just in case we ever have to do this again, or just, you know, being kind to the next guy, making it easy for them to get that off. And we'll tighten that from the, I may even attempt to tighten that from the bottom, because we got more room in here to do so. Because remember that what's going to happen is that water pump pulley is going to try to spin, so we've actually got a tool to help hold this in place that we'll need to get on there, as well as the tool to help tighten it, and we'll give that thing a couple of good whacks to get it seated. But with that in there now we could just get our lower part of our shroud clipped into place, and then you know, we'll go from there, and we'll bring you back in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. So you can see we have our upper radiator hose in. One thing to note, however, is if you remember, we replaced the thermostat housing. This is the Gates thermostat housing. This thermostat housing, we found out, was actually a little bit thicker than the factory one. So the factory clamp, spring clamp that came off of the upper radiator hose actually wouldn't fit back on. So I had to go out and get the screw clamp that you see here. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's, I mean, that'll get it. But what I wanted to show you was, if you remember, I talked about the difference in the factory hose. Now notice Mopar does this pretty much all their hoses, which I think at least all the ones I've ever ordered, which is nice. You'll see with the OEM hoses you get, now this is the heater core hose, you'll get all new clamps at the end, which have these pins on them, so you can slide them over, take these yellow pieces off, and the spring clamps will clamp shut. Also, you'll notice that this has 1, 2, 3 spots at which it attaches to the truck. This one attaches to the firewall. These two attach to the passenger side valve cover. So the nice thing is, not only do you get new hoses, but you get new clamps, and you also get the new fasteners on the hose as well. So we're going to work on getting these installed. We did flush out the heater core just to remove as much of the old coolant as we could. And now with that being done, we're going to get these heater core hoses installed, and that should wrap up at least all of the cooling system at that point. Yes, we still need to get a radiator cap. The old one actually has a damaged seal on the bottom of the cap, so I don't want to reuse it, so I'll have to pick one up, but that's relatively minor. But that'll actually take care of all the bulk of the work of the upper engine and of the cooling system. We got minor things to do, like rebolting the exhaust down below, but I won't take videos of that. Matter of fact, I'll just cut the video at this point because we're getting pretty long. Put this one out, and the next one that we come back with, we'll be drawing a vacuum on the cooling system, and if that vacuum holds, then we'll get the coolant filled up. We're going to run a couple of quarts of oil through the motor and just open up the drain plug, so that way if anything did make its way down to the new oil pan, we just kind of flush out any contaminants. Then we'll put fresh oil in it, pop off our cooling system. So in the next video we'll be filling the cooling system, putting fresh oil in it, put a fresh oil filter in it, and then we'll be attempting to start at that point. With that being said, I'll get these heater core hoses on and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see we got our heater hoses in place, and because it was factory hoses, you can see that we've clipped them in place in the valve cover. We've clipped the one clip back there that holds it in place against the firewall, and per even the and I did look at this on our other Ram 1500, the parts one, the red one behind the garage there, just to verify. But they've got the upper heater core hose going to the black, and the lower one going towards the silver. In other words, you see where that says engine top, is going to this top fitting, and then one's going to the bottom fitting. So the top heater core hose is going towards the black, and the bottom one's going towards the silver on the water pump. I don't know if these heater cores in these trucks have any kind of valve in it that would make the flow some type of bidirectional. I don't think that it does, but don't quote me on that. But point is, we're putting it back the way that we found it. We did order a new cap for our coolant reservoir. There's the part number there in case you're curious. Because if you remember, this one was broken. So it should fit down over here, which we've already got it in, and we should just be able to bend it forward and snap it back in place. There we go. Okay, got it. Just didn't make a really loud click. So what we're gonna do next is hook up our overflow tube. Now we're probably going to hold off on hooking up that overflow tube. I mean, we'll route the hose, but when we get a radiator cap, part of the next thing that we'll do, and we're going to cut this a video at this point because we've done a lot of work to this truck. We've got a lot of pieces on it. There's a couple of minor things that still left to be done, like hooking up the exhaust below the truck, but you know, we'll do that off camera. You're not missing anything by me not recording it. It's literally just tightening some bolts. But in the next video that we bring you back on will be the video in which we attempt to start it. What we'll do first is we'll draw a vacuum on the cooling system, verify we don't have any vacuum leaks. If it holds vacuum, then we'll fill the coolant system. We'll dump some oil into the crankcase like we were talking about earlier. We'll dump a quart or two and just kind of let it open up the drain plug and let it flow out and take any residual trash with it. Put a drain plug in it, fill it up, give it a fresh oil filter. And as long as our oil is topped off and our coolant is topped off, we'll attempt to give this thing a start. So the next video, we will attempt to start this thing. But with that being said, if you've made it through this rather long and rambling type video, if you found this information useful and you haven't subscribed already, please consider do so. We're about 920, a little over 920-ish subscribers at this point. We're still working towards that 1,000 subscriber mark to kind of get us to that first milestone. But with that being said, I'll let you go and I'll bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye.